Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Crossroads, and I'd like to welcome my guests from Canada. Welcome, Robert Klinck.
Hello, Arnie. Good to see you again.
Pleased to have you, Robert. How are things going on the eastern sides of Canada?
It's extremely hot, insufferably hot for a
In
Canadian because we're not used to this.
okay. How hot is it? How hot is it, Robert?
Well, the room I'm in is 32, and that's about the outside temperature too. But
Mm,
it's also extremely humid.
hmm
Ottawa has a tendency to have a humid climate. So
Yeah, yeah.
if it was 32 where Wally is, it wouldn't be so bad because he's in a dry area. But
hmm
the humidity makes the discomfort much greater.
I appreciate that because I know that when I've headed to the eastern sides, headed up to Brisbane and further north, of course, the humidity is what hits you. It's
Hmm.
totally different. The temperature's one thing, the humidity's another. Welcome, Wallace Klinck.
Oh, honey. Yeah, it's pretty nice out here right now in Western Canada. It's a bit rainy today, but the temperature is, very pleasant actually.
Excellent.
And but I agree with you on the eastern seaboard. The heat and the humidity combined is enough to just about kill me. It's
Mm.
really, really oppressive.
Yeah, no, I appreciate
I've
that.
been down there. I would never want to live down there.
hmm
Just I don't stand the heat like that
Yeah,
too much.
I went up to Darwin. My son was working up there, and I went to visit him a couple of times. And I tell you, anything about 30 degrees, and that was just with the humidity. And I think while I was up there, I think it was about 36 or 38, which was quite high. But with the
Yes.
humidity, and it's just, why are you living here? This is really harsh. And it was harsh. It was uncomfortable for me. And yet in the desert, 40s, 42 every day, and you get used to it. And the hot day is 47, whereas an average day in summer is 42. So you do. It's all relative to what you're used to, what you're accustomed to, and he was
Yeah,
accustomed to it.
the desert is it's if it's dry, you don't feel it so much.
hmm
But at night, actually, the desert, I don't know about Australia, but it can get chilly.
It certainly can. That's right.
Yeah.
I've got a thick. I don't know if I've got it here. I don't have it here, but I've got a thick coat that essentially you could take to the South Pole, and it had a collar that you could do up and Velcro it across, and then of course you have your helmet, and you have a Foreign Legion tail on your helmet to stop the wind from the back, and with your earmuffs on. And really, I mean, the front of you is about the only thing that's exposed in the middle of the night. Around when I was in the bush working on the refineries and stuff, that's what you do. So it's
You were in the South Pole.
felt like I was in the South Pole at times. I was in the Simpson Desert, a place called Moomba, and I went across the border to another small refinery there. I can't remember the name. It'll come to me later on. Anyway, we'll pick up the news services. I'll just cut across and let's have a look at what's important for today. So the Australian Victoria is coming out of its lockdown in 2 days' time, and I think that's okay. It's a long time coming, but there are some articles that I think they're really important talking about this. And this is Janet Albritson, very good writer, intelligent woman. And she's done, in my view, she's done a very good job here with a whiff of fascism. And in other words, they're starting to talk about this dictatorial state. At last, they're starting to talk about it. I think it's very, very important that we look at what the state is doing under these emergency powers, that they've been laying down these emergency powers probably for the last 20 years. And now they've exercised them, they've initiated them over the last 15 months. And so you can see this is how fascism, this is how communism comes about. Treachery from a long time ago, and the politicians, the bureaucrats, the public servants have been doing their work behind the scenes, undermining Australia's freedoms for that long. And we've got to be mindful of it. Windfall taxes, this is to do with property valuations and land. And of course, it's absolutely caning. I use the word caning. You grab a cane and start whipping people with a cane. That's what it's doing to our young people who want to get in on the property market. This is the cruel and unusual punishment that they're inflicting on young people, and this is the government that's doing this. This is not old people, young people, or something like that. This is deliberate policy, and I've been writing about this for a few weeks, and now it's finally surfacing how brutal it is on the young people. How brutal, how deliberately brutal. They'll never, ever get out of debt. Now, the Epoch Times, most of the stories here are just sort of reporting, and I think that's important to keep things reporting, but it's one of their videos. They've got a channel called The Crossroads, and in this instance, it was the headline that I found most interesting, and that was, "The Republicans make anti-socialism the key focus for 2022 midterms." Anti-socialism. Now, this is the monopoly capitalist party that they're proposing, that they're supposedly anti-socialist, but in actual fact, I would label this managed dissent, controlled opposition. It's like a wrestling match. They already know what they're going to do. They're just going through the process. And so this is managed dissent on the part of the Republican Party. I don't trust them, and I certainly don't trust Trump. And I think that people are putting all their eggs in one basket when what they've got to do is trust themselves to try and work this through. Gateway Pundit, again, okay, talking about elections and the fraud in America, and they'll continue on topic with that. Again, it's dialectic. It's really everything that the Democrats do, everything that Biden does is wrong, and they offer no viable, in my view, alternative. Very important to recognise that you've got to look at what is the end position. Again, the Spectator. This Spectator is a journal, an Australian journal, and okay, we're going into totalitarianism in New Zealand. Okay, and what? And what? What is your answer to it? Well, you've got to vote Liberal. Look here, the centre-right cannot hold. I mean, everyone's got to move to the left. More socialism, more collectivism. This is the only viable solution we've got. And of course, any form of totalitarianism is centralisation of power. And this is what we're looking at here. This third article from the Spectator. Germany taking over the EU. Germany was always going to dominate the EU. The EU really is a centralisation of power animal. That's what it's about. And in here it says that Hungary, because Hungary might have a different point of view, they want to actually somehow or other force another mechanism onto the EU so that there is only one policy and everyone has to abide by that policy, every nation. See, it's not a democratic institution, the European Union, nothing to do with democracy. Their parliament there, they don't vote on anything. They just meet and discuss till the cows come home. But it's the bureaucrats who actually initiate the laws in the EU, and that's really, really important. Totalitarianism, that's what we're looking at. Now, I wanted to just highlight to our readers the extensive library that we've got at ALOR. And in this case, The Enemy Within by Robert de Jager talks about the communist conquest of China and how important it is to actually go back in history and see how these events transpired. And this 336-page booklet that's here. Why did these events occur? How did they transpire? Who played their part in what? I was reading just this week about the different banking houses that were involved in financing Hitler and also Mussolini. And I'm thinking this was actually quite deliberate. If you like, the establishment of a centralist party in Germany was quite deliberate because the policies were so oppressive from the Versailles Treaty, were so oppressive, they impoverished the nation. And so here was this saviour, came out of nowhere from the beer halls. This saviour came out. And of course the central banks were instrumental in supporting. And when I say central banks, I mean Wall Street, I mean London. These central banks were instrumental in supporting the central banks in Germany in order to finance this war party called Hitler. We call it Nazism, whatever. National socialism, collectivism, totalitarianism. It's no different to what we see in China or we see in Russia. It's no different in Europe. This is just an increase in power, centralisation of power, and it continues on. And of course, behind this centralisation, there's always central banks. They're actually outworking their own policy. Very, very important part of history. Don't think these things happen in a vacuum. They don't. If something happens politically, and it continues to happen politically, you'll be bet assured that there are people behind pulling the strings and pushing the levers of power in order to bring these things about. Anyway, that's my opening salvo for today. I think these are important points to actually take into account. Managed dissent, where they control the opposition in order to bring the two supposed warring parties into the direction that they want to achieve the policy. Your thoughts, please, Robert Klinck.
Well, I was in Australia a number of years ago. That would be in 2015 when Trump was organizing his campaign to become the Republican candidate for the presidency in the United States. And I was blown over. The newspapers in Australia were totally obsessed with this American politician and criticizing him unrelentingly. And I just thought, what is going on here? Why this pursuit of this guy? He might not even be the candidate, but he was like a demonic threat or something like that. And when I went to New Zealand subsequently, I saw the same thing in their press. Well, this was before he was even the candidate for the leadership. And I just thought, this is a contrived perspective on political developments in the United States. I got back to Canada. I was listening to the radio in the morning. Every morning, relentlessly, they piled on to Donald Trump. I mean, they didn't know anything about the guy yet. Now they say he's the worst thing that ever happened if you're listening to the media. But I thought, this is so artificial. It's just a scenario that has been developed and is being imposed upon the mind of the public. So from that point on, I concluded that Donald Trump is one half a dialectical opposition. And it certainly seems to be that way. And, you know, he's done such strange thing. He's got an amazing reputation with a lot of people in the United States, but he's the guy who came out with the proposal to vaccinate the entire population, which was a totally tyrannical and I believe unnecessary measure. He's the guy who told his supporters to go down to the White House when they all got in trouble for being invited in and wandering around the corridors there. So he has actually played a role, I would say. I think he's just an actor in the same way that Biden now is an actor. And I really have become convinced that this political show that's put on is totally a charade. And they come up with characters to play roles and convince people that they are providing some kind of an alternative. But when you elect them, you find that that's an illusion. The alternative isn't there. So I've even been sort of convinced by a fellow named Henry Mackau, who writes in Canada, and he's been theorizing for a long time that Hitler played exactly the same role on the international scene back in the 1930s. And it's very similar. I mean, Hitler came in, he was reputed to have rebuilt the German economy, given the Germans their pride back. But he was just the counterpart to the communists. And in the end, his efforts led to the ruination of Germany, the total destruction of that country, the subjection of that country to the most abominable controls and abuses after the war. So you really have to wonder about the reality of politics. As I get older, I really believe that my mind has been filled with all sorts of mythologies, and you say the word Hitler, and for most of the world, the devil incarnate appears before their eyes. But I really think that Hitler would just played. He might have been conscious of it. I wonder if Trump was conscious. I think he was played, at least, if he wasn't a player. But this party business is just a road to nowhere. And every time the party goes nowhere, a proposal comes up that somebody else will take you to the destination you want to go to. But if you vote for them, you vote them in, you don't get a better result than you did with the previous group. Perhaps the press will, or the media will give it a different slant and say that so-and-so is more successful. But if you look at the fundamental situation, nothing really changes. And nothing really changes because the world of politics is controlled by the world of finance completely. You know this. Candidates are not going to go anywhere unless they have substantial financial backing. In the United States, a presidential candidate is accepted to be in need of about $1 billion in order to run a campaign. Well, you're not going to get Joe Blow on the corner store running a campaign for the presidency of the United States. So although they say we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that's not the way the financial people see it. And they control the thing. And when the people are really exhausted, they will produce perhaps a third or a fourth party with a different agenda. But usually those other parties exist only for the purpose of drawing a percentage of the vote away from the non-preferred candidate, the candidate the financial people aren't backing at that moment. So we've really got to think outside of the context of political parties and how some person or some group of persons can be elected to save us. They cannot do that because they are in the back pocket of the financial powers. It's the essence of our politics. And unless we correct that financial situation, which is a total monopoly, the banks create our money supply out of nothing, well then we're never going to change this political scene. And it's always going to be play acting and deception, just dialectical back and forth between somebody who's allegedly progressive and another who's allegedly conservative, but in reality, they come down to the same thing. None of them will challenge, for example, the financial system. They just won't talk about it.
Very, very important. Thank you, Robert. That's that's certainly a very good opening salvo. Just to show people the Henry Makow, I call him Henry Makow, website. There it is, and you can go and catch up with what he writes about. I find it interesting. It's usually a quite hard-hitting and intimidating to actually go there, because in Australia, if his website was there, we don't have the same free speech laws. And no doubt Henry Makow would find himself before the commissars at CZAR, commissars, that we've got in Australia, who are essentially the thought police. Anyway, your thoughts and comments, please, Wallace Klinck.
Well, there's no doubt about it. You see people go about their daily affairs, and they're manipulating this and that, the different physical things and filling different positions of administration. And they assume that that is basically the end of the story, except that we're told that some people have too much of the wealth and too much power, which is more than true. But it doesn't explain the situation in any way at all. See, everything we do is dependent upon money. What can you do in the way of a business transaction without using money? That is, transferring figures from one account to another in settlement of an obligation. You can't do anything without money. We just don't operate that way. This is not a barter situation. In other words, money controls everything that is done. A lot of people think that what we do controls money. No way. That is not the case. Because money is the initiator of initiative. It's only credit that can bring forth initiative. And it is only a stringency or cutting back on credit that can destroy creativity. So we have abstracted ourselves from reality by creating a situation of numerology, which is quite just that, numerology, and which we cannot assume necessarily relates to our real organic physical affairs. It's absolute foolishness to assume that our money system is just simply a neutral reflection of what we actually do in life. It isn't. The money system represents what we do in a way that would suggest that we have only a fractional ability to do what we actually could or can do if we were freed from the restrictions of the credit and the money system. Life is much, much bigger than the money system allows. But we don't realize that because we're all dependent upon money. And this has created a dreadful situation. It's a situation where those who actually scarcity contrived or controlled is the means of controlling people. Because if people are in a state of abundance, you're going to have a hard time dictating to them as far as, trying to control what they do with their lives. They'll just say, I don't need you. I'm okay. But if people are desperately in need of money because they are desperately in debt, then when you make demands upon them, they will pay attention. They will comply. In other words, money exercises a dictatorial control over humanity. People don't seem to realize that they are being controlled. They may sort of have a feeling that something isn't right, but they don't really understand. Douglas explained in his social credit works the precise nature of the problem, the manner in which the credit is monopolized, made scarce relative to its real need by people who have seized control of its creation and cancellation. And so we're being literally dominated and controlled day in and day out, year in and year out, by an instrument that we have fashioned or that has been fashioned by certain human beings who are adept at designing or drafting financial mechanisms, but not in a way that releases human initiative for the benefit of all, but in the way that centralizes it for the benefit of those who control the issuance and cancellation of credit which we use as money. And it's unfortunate that people are so drastically brainwashed because they've been denuded of the ability to perceive reality. And they just lie down and take a beating all the time, whether it means being sent to war or whether it means being put through recessions, being put through ruinous inflations, all things which are entirely unnecessary, but are financial phenomena, which are controlled to destroy nations, to centralize nations in larger groups of nations, with those who are doing it always centralizing power unto themselves. Man is enslaved. Man has been simply taken over and made victims to those who used us as slaves to their will.
Mm.
This is a terrible thing that has happened.
It certainly is. It certainly is. I'm just going to cut across, Wally, to the newspaper, and I want to just talk this through just a bit. Now, here we've got the Victorian windfall tax kicks in. So this means that if property increases in value, then they're going to confiscate 50% of the profit, 50% of that in a rezoning. 50%. They're going to tax at 50%. So what does that mean to a young person who's going to buy a block of land? It means that if the developer buys a paddock and he pays X amount for it, and over the course of that development, he subdivides and then he pursues a profit through the cost of developing the property. If there's more than 100,000, which is going to be absolutely 100,000 is only running a bulldozer for a few days, let's be realistic about it, in its subdivision of laying sewers, power, water, gas, telephone, all those sorts of things that you need in a subdivision, putting down the roads, paving, footpaths, curbing, stormwater. I mean, let's be realistic. A subdivision is a huge investment of capital in order to house homes, to place homes on there. And this 50%, in other words, this is a straight up charge against the developer, a straight up charge. But what does it mean to the young people who go to buy the block? What does it mean? I understand that our Prime Minister acknowledged the fact that 50% of modern homes are taxes. 50%. 50% of modern homes are taxes paid to the government. What does that mean to the young people? You say, well, okay, you get a job, whatever job, doesn't matter, and you want to build a house. Now, I've been a builder and I know what it costs to build a house. And say we put 100,000 on a house, it's not ridiculous to say that's the cost. If the materials are historical prices, 100,000 would be realistic to build a house. But if you turn around and you say that 100,000 becomes 200,000, becomes 300, becomes 400,000, what does it mean to the young person on his income? What does it mean? It means he's on the never never. The level of indebtedness changes from something. When I built my home, I paid for it over a period. My first home as a young person, I paid for it over a period of about 7 years. Paid the house and land, bought the whole lot over 7 years through tenacious work ethic and saving, hard saving. So 7 years I cleared the debt. Now, my children are going for homes. What does that mean to them? Do they get a 7-year opportunity to buy and freehold their home? No. Do they get it for 17 years? No. Do they get it for 27 years? Maybe. But let's be realistic. Let's be realistic. They're going to be indebted for basically their entire working career to get their home. They're going to be enslaved to debt. This is government policy. Now, when you talk about the scriptures and this story about Joseph with his coat of many colours and him indebting the people where they lost, he cornered the market, monopolised grain, and then he enslaved them. He confiscated their seed, he confiscated their cattle, their homes, their farms, and in the end they sold themselves to slavery. That was the lesson, that was the archetypal lesson of Joseph and his coat of many colours, that the economists can do it. And it's no different today. It's no different today that our children, our grandchildren, are being sold into debt slavery by government policy. That's what they're doing. They're imposing a form of financial slavery, of wage slavery. And the thing is that we've argued, if you like, our cultural heritage is to actually outlaw slavery. That was physical slavery, but financial slavery is the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. The only difference is, okay, you may not have a chain around your neck, but you're still enslaved. Psychologically and financially, you're enslaved. You'll never get to own your own home, which is a natural desire for every person. Every person wants their own block of land, their own plot. They want it so they can grow their own, if they like, grow their own food, raise their children, play cricket or footy or whatever the sport is in their backyard. Baseball, gridiron, whatever. That's the idea of it, is that this is their home, their roots are there, and this is where they raise a family. But if you're indebted to that point, you can't afford to have a sick day, you can't afford to take time off, you don't even know if you're going to put food on the table because your level of indebtedness is so great. And of course, with interest rates being unprecedentedly low, 2 to 4% or something, it wasn't that long ago under Keating, we had interest rates of 17%. Farmers were paying 22 and 25% interest. Now these are just totally confiscatory, exploitive situations. Now what is that homeowner who goes in for 300, 400, 500,000 worth of debt? What are they going to do if the interest rates move just 1%? They'll be instantly bankrupt. The houses will go on the market and the economy can collapse. And this is the scenario that's being played out. This is a deliberate financial policy. This is centralisation of power using the financial system. When in actual fact, if you take a breath to stop and you think, well, how long does it take to build a house? And I'm telling you, look, eye to eye, I'm telling you, 9 weeks. If you're on the ball and you've got the tradies ready, 9 weeks you can build a house. 9 weeks. That's it. Barren block of land, as long as the subfloors are all, when I say infrastructure, the sewers, the power, water, all that sort of stuff is laid in the subdivision. You bring in the tradies, 9 weeks later, you can unlock the front door for the people to actually take possession of that house. 9 weeks, that's how long it takes. 9 weeks. And yet the person can be indebted for, 50 years, 90 years? 9 weeks is all it takes. And the thing is that we've got robots now that actually lay the bricks. They can lay 10 times the number of bricks that a brickie can lay. A robot can do it. So that means that even the 3,000 to 9,000 bricks, depending on the size of the house, they can lay those bricks in, honestly, a day or two. So it's all of these things, you start placing it together and you realise that if the machines are doing all the work, why am I indebted for 40 years or 50 years? Why am I? And this is the nature of the financial system. And of course they completely control the narrative, the situation, where we talk about dialectics, we talk about managed dissent. These are really, really important issues for you to grapple with and to get clear in your mind, because that's the narrative being played. And they're enslaving us, and this is how they're doing it. And then the question comes is, what are we going to do about it? How can we do something about it? And this is the question for this age. I believe it's up to the individual. We don't have the barons. We don't have Archbishop Stephen Langton. The church is silent. It's got to be the individual. It's got to be you. It's got to be I. It's got to be us. We've got to work together. We've got to find a way through. And don't tell me God hasn't given us the tools. This tool, this communication tool that we're using, is just another one of many tools that we can put to good order, to good use, to set us free. But we've got to have the will, the political, the cultural, the spiritual will. I call it faith. We've got to have it. Yes. We can actually incarnate the situation. Wally, you're jumping at the gun. All right, I'll give you the floor back.
Well, Jesus said that he would return and bring with him the Holy Spirit to live within us. Well, I don't think we have any idea. Most Christians, as far as I can see, are waiting for some very, very enormous event where they will be wafted away to some undescribed place called heaven. What they're going to be doing there, I'm not quite sure. But they don't think of the kingdom, which Jesus said, if you seek the kingdom, all of these other things, all these material ones and all this stuff, will be given to you. And technology, I mean, Douglas was dreaming about these instruments of calculation instruments when he was
Tabulators.
Tabulation machines, and he saw these streams of tickets and costs and prices. He dreamt this. He didn't do something to work himself into an awareness of it. I understand that the scientists who developed organic chemistry had a dream about coiled snakes, and from that he was inspired to infer that organic material was composed of circular molecules. You see, I mean, how can you say that we've worked ourselves into this position? We don't know what extent it has been pure inspiration, and we don't know where the inspiration came from. But we know it's happened. It's there, and it's made it possible for us to do most amazing things. And yet we're convinced, it seems, that we must produce all these things from our own effort, which is a magnificent error and a magnificent conceit, a falsehood. We have been given so much, like you say, Arnie, we've been given so much that it's really incalculable how an abundant life, which Jesus said he came to give us, is life and life more abundant, not the mess we're in now. So it's we have not recognized the Holy Spirit. And I'm speaking for a lot of people. I'm not going to try and pass judgment on anyone, because Christ himself said that even he was not here to judge the world. He was here to save it. It was for the higher power, the one who sent him, God, to do the final judgment. And yet we have so many people today, conservative, are especially judgmental when it comes to talking about their neighbors being lazy people. But the thing of it is, if technology, if science is supplanting labor, why would you be continuing to do the same work if there's no need for it? You're being replaced by an outside factor. You would have to be categorized as, I think, technically insane if you insisted on continuing to do the work that was done in the past at a much lower level of efficiency than is required today because of the enormous efficiency of non-labor factors. And so that we are poisoned by a metaphysics that is false, paints a false picture of reality, a false picture of humanity, and this has drastically interfered with our ability to accept the blessings that are literally showered upon us. Mm. It seems that God is working overtime day and night to shower us with things we don't seem to recognize or appreciate.
Mm. Yeah, that's beautifully put. Thank you, Wally. That's That really is. It's quite a vivid picture when we look at the abundance of energy, advanced control robotics, but also the understanding, if you like, of the nature. I mean, even the husbandry of bees. You look at the advancement that's happened in the last 100 years. Absolutely beautiful to recognise and look at the way the real world is. Your thoughts, please, Robert Klinck.
Well, you were talking about the cost of building a house, Arnie. I'll just make a comment. I understand that the cost of basic building materials in Canada has gone up by a factor, by a threefold over the past year. So building a house is now a very expensive proposition. And I know of one person who sold his house because the prices are so high, thinking that he could build a house and make a big profit, but he found out it's not such a good deal because the cost of building materials is so elevated. Anyway, you've talked about the desperate financial prospects of young people, Arnie. And, you know, it virtually makes me sick to think how young people have been completely betrayed by us. You know, they talk about how we went off to war twice in the great wars and we preserved our freedoms. And, well, what does it all come to? It's all come to slavery and a life that is more precarious and less free than people were in the 19th century. I was reading a book about Irish history recently, the 5th century in Ireland. It said that there were no towns, but every person had a farm. And the word they used to describe the production from those farms was prodigal. Everybody was well off in terms of what they needed in order to live, what they produced from their farm. They didn't have money. Well, they introduced money, and that resulted in the potato famine in the mid-19th century, where hundreds of thousands of people starved to death in Ireland, and I don't know, a million or so emigrated because they just couldn't make a living there. This was when this wonderful phenomenon of money was introduced. It reduced a wonderful, practically an Eden that Ireland had been, at least economically, in the 5th century, to a place of starvation where people were trying to subsist on rotten potatoes. So, you know, you got to get realistic about these things. There's this idea that progress is constant and conditions are always improving. And indeed, they should be if we were getting the benefit of the technological advances, but that benefit is stolen from us. And I am ashamed that we have done so little to protect it for future generations. It's an absolute scandal, a total betrayal as far as I'm concerned. The youth have been deprived of their proper heritage. As Wally was saying, we've got the most incredible heritage of productive means and the natural resources of the world. We have sunshine for free. We have air for free. We have the fact that you plant a seed in the ground and it turns into something you can eat. It's an amazing thing. This is the way the world is made. It's made to deliver abundance for us if we will apply the laws governing it in a constructive, proper way. But we've abandoned that under this corrupting influence of centralized money power, and as I say, deprived our children and their children of what should be the most glorious heritage. And in doing that, we have undermined their faith. And we've created for them a constant situation of cognitive dissonance because they're not foolish. The young people today are aware of the technology in ways that previous generations weren't. You know, they're all into the electronics and the computers, but they're not deriving the benefit from these that they should. Playing games is not the primary advantage that computers and automation should be giving us. All those things are there, but it's filtered away, it's filched away. The benefits, the natural benefits are filched away by this financial system and all converted into debt. I mean, immeasurable amounts of debt that are transferred onto future generations. So that instead of life becoming richer, more secure, life is increasingly more precarious. This is not the way things should develop naturally. And it's only because we've got this interposition of the financial system that is a barrier erected between us and the heritage that we should all be benefiting from. And unfortunately, I guess we're just too busy to think about it because it's so obvious if you do think about it. But we're not safeguarding this for future generations and allowing its inevitable progress to deliver a continuing advantage to the entire population. This fellow George Soros has caused so much destruction in the world. He's got this Open Borders organization, and the Open Borders is designed to create chaos, and it is designed to flood every country with people who are relatively poor, so that the benefits that should be naturally accruing to the native populations are not getting to them. And in fact, it's a system of cultural sabotage. And the people who are being enticed into countries that are so far from their cultures and the way they were raised, their innocence, I think. They don't know that a trap is being laid for them. A trap is being laid for them in exactly the same way as a trap is being laid for people who get into home buying today. Something very strange is going on when prices are going up by 60% in 6 months. When you say, as you say, Arnie, when they raise the interest rates, it's going to be disaster for so many people. And their dreams of having their own castle, you know, an Englishman's home is his castle. Well, now an Englishman's home is his mortgage, and a mortgage that goes on in perpetuity for his entire life. It's just a ridiculous situation. And the only remedy for it is to challenge this financial power. It's got to be faced. No political party will face it. So it's got to be the population who realize that it's a scam and who decide that it is intolerable and it has to go. So that is our only hope. And social credit is a very reliable guide through the challenges that lie ahead if people would only give it some consideration.
Thank you for that, Robert. That's particularly well put. And of course our libraries are riddled, immersed with social credit. If you like social credit documents, social credit books, alor.org. We've got 5 libraries up here, apart from our 3 video channels. But your PDF library, and particularly your social credit library, which is there, and hundreds of documents that have been developed from thinking people, thinking social creditors over the last 100 years. And you should avail yourself of these. There's courses to actually do in your Actionist Corner. You can actually pick up under training, start with your social dynamics, how people do get on, how they actually build up society, how societies are built based on a foundational philosophy. Societies can only exist under a foundational philosophy, and of course, if you've got counter philosophies, then you've got potential for, if you like, discontent or even friction. So the social credit training is right there, and when we talk about social credit, we're referring to, of course, is Douglas social credit. This is what we're actually presenting to you, and I find it fascinating that the Chinese have seized the name social credit. And under cognitive dissonance, of course, it's a police state. It's a form of monitoring, assessment, carrot and stick, punishment, rewards and punishment. That's what the Chinese social credit is about. And that's cognitive dissonance. It's the very opposite of what the words actually mean. And that's why you've got to look at this Douglas social credit, because it is the counter to totalitarianism. It is where systems, government, institutions, sports clubs, all those sorts of things, even the existence of the church is there to serve you as an individual. It's there to serve you. These counters of philosophies, one of collectivism, of where the individual counts for nothing. That's what we're that's what we're experiencing. And the counter to it, of course, is where everything exists to serve the individual. The Sabbath was made for man. The Sabbath was made for man. The system of law, of government, of institutions was made for man, to serve man. And that's why the kingdom of God is within. It's not without, it's not within the group. It's actually within you as the individual. The purpose of the kingdom is to serve you, to enlighten you, to inspire you. And these people who have seen these great revelations of chemistry, of anatomy, of biology, of the sciences, the industrial arts, and of course culture is also part of it, is law. Part of it is a law, a just law, an unjust law, a just law, the canon. What is a just law? The canon law. That's what it's about. It's actually the nature of how things work best. Anyway, we're 52 minutes in it. I'm going to call for closing comments. Please, Wally Klinck.
Well, these power brokers that we have today do not, I think, almost exclusive, entirely do not really think in terms of natural law being the primary and legitimate governor of human affairs. They think that they can commit arbitrary acts and legislation in complete disregard for the principles of natural law. But natural law, human association, conducts itself within the context of some kind of inspiration, and it is natural law. So that natural law supersedes human law. Human law is created by people who are becoming obviously increasingly less competent to run the world, but who think that they are increasingly competent to dominate the world. And it is creating a crisis. So, I mean, the activities of governments, insofar as they exist, and it has been our philosophy to minimize their involvement in our affairs, is to encourage and to elicit or draw out, to allow human creativity and initiative to actualize itself. But of course, every time the government gets involved to fix things, they have to impose some kind of legislation which restrains or restricts human initiative, almost as though human initiative was in itself innately evil or something and had to be suppressed. That's no way to go. So it's really an amazing thing, actually, that we have fallen into such error and such and such a grim outlook. I mean, I ended up in the emergency ward here a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking to one of the paramedics who had brought me in. She was a girl about, in her mid-20s, I suppose, or late mid-20s. And we got, they have time to stand by the side and talk to you a bit. And I usually try to bring something constructive up. And she showed a particular willingness to talk. I said, well, I can tell you what's causing this problem if you're interested. I said, I don't want to foist it on you. She said, no. She said, you're educating me. Please talk, please speak. And then she divulged to me that she had lost her entire retirement fund because our delightful premier, Jason Kennedy, had raided the public pension funds to invest in this energy business, which was, under the current circumstances of hostility, destined to fail. It did fail. The money is gone, and now she's left destitute. I almost cried.
I've actually heard, Wally, of where I think it was in Ireland, where the and this is just a vague thing. I can't pin it down, but I believe it was the Prime Minister confiscated the super funds of essentially the entire population as part of the repatriations for the debt, the Irish debt.
Phony debt, yeah.
2008 crisis, I think it was. Phony debt. So they confiscated the savings of the whole population. And I find that you sort of think about that and you think, hang on, they're pulling the future out based on what? Based on what? Based on what is it they give us? What is it that the banks actually give us? All they give us is numbers. They give us numbers. That's all they do is give us numbers. They don't actually do anything else but numbers. And they create it out of thin air. They create the numbers out of thin air in the form of a loan. This extra 100,000 that my children have to consider if they're going to get a home, extra 100 or 200,000. Where is that? Is that being taken from someone's savings, or is it just created out of thin air? And that's exactly right. That's what the banks do. They create in the form of a debt. And the word mortgage, mortality, life, grip. That's what mortgage means. Grip of death over you until you're dead. Your thoughts on...
Arnie, if you want a loan from me and you come to me and borrow 50,000, and I simply go down in my basement or my workshop and create the 50,000, brand new money. I mean, we don't deal in notes these days. We deal in figures and accounts, but it's the same idea. If I then go to you and lend you the 50,000 on a schedule of repayments, and you don't fulfill your obligation, so-called, and I come along and say, well, gee, you're not doing your part here, and we have an agreement, and I'm going to have to foreclose on your assets.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do? You're going to just lie down and take it? Or are you going to say there's something a little bit screwballed here, something is not quite right? If you did that, you'd go to jail. And if you probably knew what was going on, you'd have me put in jail. I'm stealing your assets.
That's right. That's what it's about. It's about confiscation.
What a racket.
It is a racket. That's right. It's a Ponzi scheme and a racket. And we've got to a point where our governments have actually handed the responsibility and authority to manage our financial system. The government has handed it to foreign powers, to international banking cartels. They've handed it. They, under our constitution, I believe it's the same in Canada, they have a responsibility for managing and adhering and administering the coin of the land, the money system. And our state banks have closed down. They've all been amalgamated, centralised. And then, of course, the central banks now go to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank to get what? To get numbers. That's all they get. And that's absurd where they're going to confiscate the very real assets of the world, of future generations. They're going to confiscate the lot unto them because they issue numbers. Your thoughts and closing comments, please, Robert Klinck.
Well, we need a vision in order to establish what our policies are going to be. And through the educational system, particularly the universities, but now right down even to elementary school, an attempt is being made to condition young people's thinking along collectivist lines, communitarian or communist lines. And this is going to have disastrous consequences. It's already having disastrous consequences. What's happened in the last 15 months is disastrous. And it's going to get worse because we have abandoned all the old restraints that were evolved on government power, evolved over centuries. They've all been thrown in the waste bin. It's incredible. There are no protections against anything anymore. The government, every government has become a tyranny, a dictatorship, and attempts to protect yourself against it through the court system have been very unsuccessful, because I think the court system has been undermined in the same way every other institution in society has. And the undermining comes from this collectivist thinking. And the purpose of the collectivist thinking is to concentrate power. Now, to concentrate power at a global level. Well, when power is concentrated like this, maybe you don't feel the effects of it immediately. But in the end, it is going to turn into a meat grinder. And it's going to grind you. And it's going to grind your family. And it's not going to be fun, because you'll have no means of defending yourself, no means of protecting your assumed rights. I don't think we've had rights for a long time. It's been more of this illusion that's been fed us. But this transition has been somewhat tolerable only because of our Christian heritage. The Christian heritage and the law of love. Now, I'm not going to defend all Christians. A lot of Christians have been pretty nasty people. But the message, the true message of Christianity that you'll find in the New Testament is our protection against tyranny, because the whole point of Christianity is to allow the individual to make his choices to determine his own salvation. This is a sacred thing. You can't interfere with this. This is what God intends for us, that we shall not be forced to be good, but that we shall choose to be good. It's the only thing that makes good have any virtue at all. So it would be nice if people would appreciate the benefits that their Christian heritage has brought them, and maybe revive their Christian faith before this global tyranny is so brutally established that it's going to be decades, if not centuries, before we can come out from under its boot heel. So very important for people to think about this. What's their vision? Is their vision an ant-heap, or is their vision a society in which everything is being done to allow the individual to exercise his freedom in the most extensive way possible? Those are the alternatives, and we're on a very wrong path right now. So some serious thought is in order about these matters.
Thank you, Robert. That was an excellent summary. I can't build on that. I thought it was a very vivid picture that you've presented. Wally and Robert, it's been a particularly good crossroads today. We've covered some very important subject matter, but the thing is, it comes back to the individual. And don't say that you're not resourced. All the archives, all the work, all the libraries, everything we have is there to serve you, so that you're actually able to exercise your freedom. And that's our encouragement. That's our hope, that you will take up your cross, if you like, your own cross, your own burden, to incarnate your faith, to bring about heaven on earth. Heaven on earth. That to me is the hope and the prayer. Thank you so much, Robert and Wallace Klinck, for today's forum.
Thank you, Arnie.
And thank you, Arnie, so much for the opportunity that you're presenting us.
Mm.